As a journalist, my laptop is important. I file stories and conduct interviews all in one place. There's another way to use this nifty tool, and that's for open source investigations. Here's what you need to know. It's important to understand this term, digital open source information. That means anything you can find online with a computer and the internet. Think of videos and pictures that you see on Twitter or TikTok, or even all the info you can get from Google Earth. All of that is digital open source information. At first, those sources don't seem all that useful, but used in the right way and with the right training, open source investigators say they're critical. And leading the charge is an organization called Bellingcat.
There is so much information online, much more than you might think is there. And if you know how to find it, if you know how to navigate it, if you know how to verify it, you can really achieve really great things.
This is Giancarlo Fiorella. He's one of Bellingcat's investigators, which is pioneering open source investigations.
A big part of our mission is to spread this as far and wide as possible, right? So that everyone is able to do this. And that includes not journalists just from big organizations, but also from smaller groups as well.
Bellingcat started in 2014 by British journalist Elliot Higgins. Over the last 8 years, they've investigated major world events. That includes the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. Bellingcat traced the missile system all the way back to a Russian military base. In 2018, Bellingcat connected 2 Russian suspects to the poisoning of former Russian double agent Sergei Skripal. 1 year later, they identified a 3rd suspect. Today, Bellingcat is verifying information coming out of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They're posting the info on publicly accessible maps. And all of their investigations were done with open source information. The idea of open source investigations has really caught on in the journalism world. In the last 5 years, some of the major news outlets have launched their own investigative teams. In 2017, the New York Times launched its visual investigations team, and so far they've shared in 4 Pulitzer Prizes and many more awards for their work. The Washington Post has jumped on open source as well. They launched their own visual forensics team in 2020 and decided to double the group earlier this year. That interest from journalists on open source information isn't surprising to some experts. I talked to Micah Clark, an open source intelligence expert who has taught people about open source information, including journalists.
My goal in teaching open source intelligence to journalists and others is to make them as resourceful as possible, to make them as clever as possible about understanding what they need and figuring out different ways to get it, rather than specifically finding one tool or another that will do that for them. Journalists, I find, tend to be really good OSINT students because they're already comfortable with working with relatively limited resources and being really resourceful and asking the right questions. It's kind of the heart of journalism. And so I find that they take to open source intelligence quite well. But in order to really understand how open source investigations work, I asked Giancarlo to walk me through one of his projects. And it begins with the death of a Palestinian-American journalist in Israel earlier this year.
I saw a tweet from Al Jazeera that said that a Palestinian-American journalist named Shireen Abu Akleh had been killed in Jenin. She had been covering this raid that was happening in Jenin that the IDF was conducting. So there was lots of cameras there, not just news cameras, but cameras for people who were just in the area recording on their cell phones. And so we knew pretty early in the morning, like right after the tweet was sent out, that this was something that we could try to see if we could clarify the situation to determine who killed Shireen Abu Akleh.
Giancarlo and his team first found out where Abu Akleh had been killed by checking this photo from a Twitter video they found with a program called Mapillary. The program lets people upload photos and videos of streets around the world.
Based on this, we had a pretty good sense then of what this street in Jenin looks like. We'd never been there. I've never been to Jenin. Nobody who worked on this investigation with us had ever been to Jenin. But now you're starting to get a feel for the place.
Bellingcat also confirmed Abu Akleh was killed in the early morning. They looked at the shadows and Twitter videos they found from the killing, and they used a free program that tracks where the sun is on any given day. And with all that, they knew where and when this death had taken place. After checking footage uploaded by the Israeli Defense Force and other bystanders the same morning during the raid, Bellingcat made a key discovery. A military convoy was near Abu Akleh when she died, and a soldier could have killed her.
Once we figured out, okay, those vehicles are parked right up here, we started to get the sense that they probably had a really clear line of sight to Shireen Abu Akleh. So if you were a soldier in this truck or near this truck, you definitely could have seen her standing here as she was covering the raid.
Bellingcat checked and verified more videos and data. A sound expert was used to calculate the distance of the gunshots that killed Abu Akleh, and eventually Bellingcat made this map. The green is the IDF convoy, the purple and orange are armed groups, the red circle is Abu Akleh. Their expert estimated the gunfire came from roughly 180 meters away, right where Bellingcat had the position of the IDF convoy.
We were the first publication to make that determination, to make that conclusion, again, that it was likely an IDF soldier. The Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, and a couple of other organizations that I'm forgetting right now, they all conducted their own investigations into this incident, and they all reached the same conclusion, that it was an IDF soldier who killed her. And it was really encouraging, I suppose, for again, the strength of the methodology to see other organizations apply the same kind of research methods as we did to reach the same conclusion.
But not all open source investigators are journalists, so what does that mean for professionals like me? I asked Micah and Giancarlo the same question, and they said the two groups can work together.
I don't really consider myself a journalist. So, if you give me a list of phone numbers to cold call, or if you tell me to go knock on a door, I don't know how to do that. I'd be really nervous. I'd probably botch it, right? So whenever we have to sort of do those sorts of things, it makes sense for us to say, hey, CNN, let's try it. Can we collaborate, right? We'll do what we're good at. You'll do what you're good at. Together, we'll achieve more.
The more that open source investigators can embrace the best traditions of journalism, I think the better we'll all be, because journalism comes with ethics, journalism comes with editorial guidelines, journalism comes with judgment and a decision process, and that could actually help to professionalize the open source investigative world as well.
What's going on at Bellingcat and the New York Times and the Washington Post is an evolution in journalism. We don't know how open source will be used in the future, but we do know that it's changing the stories we tell right now with more information than ever before.